Welcome everyone, this is Hipnozer, and that's the presentation about the exponential model and its consequences, and it will also be a talk about the intrinsic value in our world of increasing population. So here is what we will mention today. First, we will see the table and chart with the population growth during the times of certain famous people across history and famous events connected with the philosophy. Then we will show some important facts about population growth, how to preserve the intrinsic value. We'll also talk about that. And the challenges with the intrinsic value, the foundational principle, key mechanisms, enforcement, psychological things and cultural regarding the intrinsic value, futures of the intrinsic world, and then we will conclude the presentation. Okay, so let's start with a table with our population growth. So during the time of Gorgias, from the Gorgias thesis mentioned in the first presentation, the population of entire Earth was around 150 million people. For comparison, right now the population of United States is 350 million people, so almost twice the world population during ancient times. Then we have the population during the Eastern Schism in 1000 year, and that's more or less the population of United States. That's how much people lived in the whole world. During the night of Winkelried, a few hundred years later, well, more or less similar population. We got Martin Luther times, and there the population has slightly increased to about 400-500 million. Then in the 18th century we had 800 million people, so slightly less than a billion. And then in the 19th century was the first time when we exceeded 1 billion people. Now, and this about 1 billion something number was kept across entire 19th century, and in the 20th century we have exceeded 2 billion, and that moment right here between Friedrich Nietzsche and Albert Camus was the moment when we had the inflection point, and population started skyrocketing, and it has doubled since 1980s, and it's 4 times larger than at the beginning of the 20th century. So this is the largest boom in the entire history that we have right now, and we can also see it on the chart, as we see in the beginning of the 20th century we had that inflection point which has boosted our population up. Okay, and what we need to keep in mind is that the major part of the philosophical ideas made during our history were made when the population was well below 2 billion, and around 3/3 of the ideas were made when the population was below 1 billion, so even smaller. Okay, that we already mentioned, that point 4. Okay, important facts about the population growth. Yes, that the point 5 we also mentioned that in the 1980s the population was twice smaller than it is today. And because the population is increasing, there is a risk that the individual value of our human, the so-called intrinsic value, might get decreased as there is increased competition for the space in the world. Okay, so let's say that this trend continues and the population rises to 16 billion. Now, as far as I checked the predictions, the actual population would be like closer to 10 billion because of already large challenges. But if it actually went up to like 16 billion, that would pose even bigger challenges than today with the preserving our intrinsic value, and those challenges would have to be addressed in many dimensions. But then there is a question how to address the exponential distribution. It's not that simple. Okay, so who would guarantee the intrinsic value? Now, as we said, ideally it would be a system that would do that. Some sort of alliances and or networks that would provide that. But if we fail with that at 8 billion people, at 16 billion people, it would be even less likely. So what would effectively happen is that only the elites would be protected in this scenario. So that leads us to the principle that every person matters. It's a very theoretical principle because it's not applying yet. No, we wish it mattered, just like we wish that human rights or children rights were perfect, but that is presenting some challenges. And only if those challenges will be addressed, we will have the intrinsic value. Okay. Okay, so what should be the mechanisms to give us the possibility of the intrinsic value? So we need to have some legal guarantee of human and ecological worth. We need to build the infrastructure for this, and well, that's a very good question, how to build infrastructure that would keep up with exponential model. That's a topic for another day. Yes. Not control. Wonder how that would work. Anyway. Right, so design standards. Yes, all sounds beautiful. Okay. And that one is interesting. How to allow participation in very large world. That's one of the reasons why direct democracy struggles. It's because the population is large and people need to elect representatives, and this election is making the process of influence much more difficult. Ah, yes. And how do you plan to do education for that many people? Yes, we need this, but, well, how to achieve that? More questions than answers, isn't it? Right. Key mechanisms, and yes, human dignity. How do you arrange that? Another question. Universal. How's that supposed to work? Seems very theoretical. Universal access for everyone. Okay. Purpose. How would that work? Interesting, isn't it? Yes, but we need all those three things mentioned here, like audit systems, protection, and sovereignty. That's all very important. How do we achieve that? That is the question. That is the question for our philosophical channel. How to do all that? Yes. Here we have the answer. Mass transformation. But who will lead such transformation? Media and empathy? How is that supposed to work? You see, so as we have said before, our little exponential model is putting a lot of challenges for the population that were not present before the inflection point, so essentially before the 20th century. Yes. So here we have some possible values for the theoretical intrinsic value world. Shared planets, safeguard for intrinsic values, self-organized community. Self-organized? Well, so far our system is not self-organized. As we see a lot of challenges in here. That's right, it won't happen by accident. Now, the version on the slide is pretty optimistic. I'm not sure I agree that the scale protects us. Usually it works the opposite way. The scale destroys us. So, with that difficult accent, we end this presentation. Thanks everyone for watching. See you then.